Everybody loves Die Hard. It's basically perfect. Well-developed characters, watertight script with clear cause and effect, and loads of explosions and guns and blood and shit. Even though the people who say it are usually insufferable and believe themselves to have personalities, it is not a coincidence that many consider it to be their favourite Christmas film. But what is rarely discussed with the film is the way the film reflects upon the time it was made. So I hope to take you through what I believe to be the legacy of the first Die Hard film. I don't believe the legacy of the film should be around the Christmas dinner table with your uncle telling you it's his favourite Christmas film, then going on to ask what you're doing with your life before quickly moving on to British sovereignty. But rather, the legacy of the film should be about what it can tell us about 80s America. I'll summarise the plot of Die Hard pretty briefly because obviously you've seen it and I don't want to waste your time even more than I already am. John McClane is on a plane to go meet his wife in Los Angeles. She went out there before him to set up their family while McClane stayed in New York arresting people and doing police activities. I don't really know what they do, to be honest. When he arrives at Holly's office, the Nakatomi Plaza, he sees loads of yuppies having a great time, doing drugs, having sex, getting drunk, doing everything we all want to do all the time. John takes off his shoes upon the advice of a stranger on a plane, then loads of Germans come in with guns and stop people from having the great time that they were having. John sees these party poopers as a great injustice and sets out on a mission to kill all of them, or at least severely wound or disable them. I don't know if they all die. Turns out the Germans aren't just in America to ruin parties, they are also after the consumer bonds within the safe, worth millions. There's a few fights, John makes a few friends, makes a few enemies, the FBI turn up, ruin a couple things, blow up, and then John kills all the Germans and goes home for Christmas with his family. We've seen it, we know it, we love it. It's not a coincidence that Die Hard came out in 1988, an election year. Sorry, I misread that. It is a coincidence that the original Die Hard came out in 1988, an election year, but I believe that this means the film can be a great insight into how the Reagan years in America can be perceived. For those of you who don't know, Ronald Wilson Reagan was an amazing rags to riches story, coming from a poor household to work with monkeys to work in the most important position in the world, American president. But yet his presidential work doesn't always reflect upon this. His most lasting legacy is his policy of Reaganomics. The basic theory of this is that lowering taxes for large corporations would mean that they could hire more employees, thus reducing unemployment, and thus reducing the stagnation that the US economy had been in since the 60s. Now, this all sounds pretty kosher to you and me, until you consider the impact and legacy of this. Firstly, less taxes for large corporations means less money for social programs such as food stamps for the poorest. How can you pay for food for those that need it if the money is staying with those that don't? This trickle-down policy is still the main strategy in American political economic policy.
The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help."
Jeff Jeffy doesn't just get to keep his money by dodging taxes, he gets to keep his money because the government let him. During Reagan's presidency, he reduced the highest tax rate from 70% to 28%. Who can blame old Hansy for trying to get into that kind of action?
We'll be sitting on a beach, earning 20%.
In fact, the director of Die Hard, McTiernan, said that he didn't want the terrorists to be political, instead making their goals financial as he thought the audience would be able to better understand. What McTiernan failed to realise that this also has political undertones. He realised that in the world of Reaganomics, where the almighty dollar is king, anyone would be able to understand Hans's goal and possibly even relate to him. The film went through many rewrites, and when screenwriter Stephen E. DeSouza went through Jeb Stewart's script, he said his initial plan was to make Hans more like a protagonist, making the audience relate to him more than in the previous drafts. And of course it was easy to relate to such a mercenary goal in Reagan's America. Abstract gain? Fuck that. Reagan's made me realise that empathy and synergistic goals fucking suck. The economy's booming! I'm happy! That was supposed to be hyperbolic and sort of derogatory to those kinds of people. It's not like a direct quote or anything. In fact, what's the framing for the whole film? John lives in New York, Holly lives in LA. 2 different sides of the country. Yeah. Why does John live in New York?
Because I'm a New York cop. I got a 6-month backlog in New York scumbags I'm still trying to put behind bars. I can't just pick up and go that easy.
Early in Reagan's political career, he was a big supporter of law and order politics, basically the concept that stricter punishment would result in less crime, and this showed in his presidency. With less money in social programs, a lot of people were driven into poverty. Once in poverty, finding a way out was incredibly hard. With zero social mobility, zero hope, and zero help, a lot of people would turn to gangs or to crime to get by. According to FBI statistics, in the year 1980, there were 500,000 people in United States prisons. By 1994, that number had tripled to 1.5 million. That's a lot of paperwork for John McClane to fill out. The case could be made that the reason John and Holly didn't get to see each other is because of Reagan. So yes, John McClane can say he doesn't have sex because of conservatism. How does a company afford to build a massive tower in LA? More money. Why are the terrorists there in the first place? Money. Now, I'm not saying that large buildings and corporations didn't exist before Monkey Man, but I am saying that the foundation of the plot relies upon the pretense of more profits for larger corporations. Die Hard would not be nearly as exciting if it took place in a mom-and-pop's ice cream store in Utah, which incidentally, Reagan also helped kill. Aggressive takeovers were rampant during the Reagan presidency, resulting in smaller businesses being acquired by larger corporations to be run just for profit. I'm not saying that Takagi personally sought the bullying of shareholders from their shares of an ice cream shop in Utah. Don't get me confused. I'm saying that the world in which Die Hard exists is a world in which the big boys on Wall Street and the big conglomerate corporations were king. The little man didn't have much power, and the little that he did was constantly under threat of being taken away. And that's possibly the most powerful message of the film, the tagline, 12 terrorists, 1 cop, the odds are against John McClane, and that's just the way he likes it. This is basically Reagan's mantra, individualism. John doesn't need the FBI or the police or big government to support him. He is a man who is talented and resourceful enough to get by on his own. He doesn't need fucking food stamps. In fact, in the scene at the end when Johnson & Johnson are firing at him with big-ass guns, his own countrymen, people who are paid to protect him, are actually his biggest enemy. I think this can be viewed in 2 ways. Firstly, through the lens of big government coming to ruin poor old John's day. In this world, involvement from higher-ups is unnecessary. Involvement of the state has ballooned. Just let McClane kill people on his own, for fuck's sake. He can do it. But it can also be viewed through the lens of growing mistrust in America. The Cold War was clearly dying down. The days of the USSR being this big, scary monster were over. I mean, he's shaking hands, for fuck's sake. Monsters don't do that. They eat people or whatever. So with communism failing, America was becoming the only superpower left. There was no one left to point the finger at. So who can be the enemy? Yourself. Throughout action film history, there has always been an element of us versus them. Films like Predator and Commando have big macho machines battling out with foreign enemies to prove America's vast superiority. But in the time of Die Hard, this wasn't as appealing. America had all but won the Cold War, and it was clear that not all the problems in the country had been solved. Films and media were waking up to the idea that maybe Americans can be evil as well.
Good morning, everyone. It's the 3rd hijacking this week involving Beirut, and this time the plane and most of the passengers are from the United States.
In 1985, TWA Flight 847 was hijacked by terrorists on its flight from Cairo to San Diego. The terrorists demanded the release of 700 prisoners or they'd blow up the plane carrying 147 people, many of whom were Americans. The terrorists brutally beat any military personnel on the plane and eventually shot Robert Stetham, killing him. He was 23. I bring this up because this changed the world that Die Hard is in. Prior to this hijacking, America would not negotiate with terrorists. Reagan changed this when 16 days after the initial hijacking of Flight 847, he personally oversaw the negotiation of the release of the remaining 39 captives. This shows how hostage situations are dealt with is not always set in stone. Hans knew the FBI's playbook off by heart, but this wasn't always the case. The period of Die Hard's release was a period of change in American policy. One that guaranteed more safety for hostages, but also gave more power to terrorists. In my mind, the safety of innocent hostages in a hostage situation should always be top priority, but by making that top priority, you also give a huge amount of power to the captors. Terrorists were given more power by negotiating with them, and this reflects within the film.
You ask for miracles, dear. I give you the FBI.
So what element of Die Hard isn't steeped in political context? Well, surely Paulina can't be connected to Reagan. Well, Thornburg says this line.
All right.
No, stop.
Look, you let me in right now, or I call the INS.
Reagan hadn't made illegal immigration a big issue during his presidency, but he did pass the Immigration Control Act. Ana Raquel Millana from Stanford University estimates that there were about 1.5 million undocumented Mexican migrants in the USA by 1986. Reagan estimated this was too much, so in his Immigration and Control Act, he made it harder for undocumented migrants to find work, making it harder for them to support themselves in their new country and making them more susceptible to deportation. I'm sure Mr. Thornburg was well aware of all of this as he profiled Paulina and threatened her. Even a small element like this scene in the film can be linked back to the political climate of the time. Nothing is safe. Context is everything.
And how many terrorists did that?
Did you get that?
So what's the point I'm trying to make? Basically, I think the conversation about Die Hard being a Christmas film isn't the central message of the film. You can watch Die Hard in March, August or December, but you can't watch Die Hard outside of the 80s, and outside of the politics of the era. I believe if you delve deep enough, you can make the case that every film is political, but I don't think you have to delve very deep for Die Hard. The absent moral centre and money-lusting policies and companies of the era can jump right out at you, just as much as the Christmas motif can. And this isn't isolated to this film in the series. Die Hard 2 looks at the failing war on drugs and the rise of the cartel, as well as continuing the theme of the enemy being just as likely to be American as opposed to a foreign power. And I don't think it's very hidden that Die Hard with a Vengeance is connected to the racial issues of the time and the killing of Rodney King. Both films deserving of their own video of analysis. Maybe I'll get round to it, maybe not. I don't know. Busy life. So next time Die Hard comes up, don't just tell people, oh, that's my favourite Christmas film. Also say, oh, that's my favourite reflection upon the Reagan era in American society. Everyone will think you're so fucking cool and smart.
Sorry, Hans, wrong guess.